What if the luxurious walls of your mansion became a prison of grief, and the unexpected arrival of a stranger shattered your meticulously constructed world of solitude? Edward Vance's black Mercedes cut through the damp, late-night streets of downtown Chicago like a phantom. After nearly 2 years of relentless travel, a non-stop escape across continents, he was finally returning home. Not by choice, but by necessity. His sprawling business empire demanded his physical presence, though he would have preferred to continue his endless flight from memory. The wrought iron gates of the mansion glided open automatically. Edward observed the imposing structure that he once called home. Now it was just another stark reminder of everything he had lost. The garden lights flickered on as he passed, illuminating the rose bushes that Eleanor, his late wife, had so dearly loved. Maria, the housekeeper who had been with the family for over 2 decades, waited for him at the entrance. Her wrinkled face showed a complex mix of joy and deep concern upon seeing him. Edward had changed profoundly. His warm brown eyes, once full of life, now seemed like 2 empty wells. His impeccable black suit and perfectly styled hair couldn't conceal the crushing weight of solitude he carried. "Welcome home, Mr. Vance," Maria greeted, trying to keep the emotion from her voice. "Your room is ready, as always." Edward nodded curtly. "Thanks, Maria. Any news I should know about?" "Well, yes, there have been some staff changes." "Tomorrow," Edward interrupted, raising a dismissive hand. "I just want to rest now." He ascended the grand marble staircase with heavy, deliberate steps. The silence in the mansion was deafening, a palpable presence. He had chosen this life, keeping himself relentlessly busy with endless meetings and constant travel. It was easier than confronting the memories, safer than allowing himself to truly feel. As he entered his room, he noticed something was different. The air smelled faintly of fresh lavender, not Maria's usual crisp lemon scent. The heavy curtains had been replaced by lighter ones, and a small vase with wild-picked flowers sat on the bedside table. These small, unexpected changes irritated him, a subtle disruption to his carefully managed pain. He didn't want changes, he didn't want anything new. His life was perfectly structured to keep grief at bay, and any alteration threatened that delicate balance. He loosened his tie and walked to the window. The city glittered under the moon, indifferent to his profound sorrow. At that moment, he heard a soft laugh drifting up from the garden, a laugh he didn't recognize. He looked down and saw a female figure tending to Eleanor's roses. Something stirred within his chest, a sensation he couldn't quite identify, or perhaps one he simply refused to acknowledge. What happens when the meticulously controlled silence of a grieving man's home is shattered by a defiant young woman, forcing him to confront not just her presence, but the ghosts of his own past? The next morning brought the familiar routine of the mansion, but with an unsettling twist. Edward descended for an early breakfast, expecting the solitude he'd grown accustomed to. Instead, he stopped dead in the dining room. A young woman he didn't recognize was meticulously setting the breakfast table. She wore the staff uniform, yet there was something undeniably different about her. It wasn't just her natural beauty or her youth, but the way she moved through the grand space, with a self-assurance that bordered on irreverence. "Good morning, Mr. Vance," she greeted him without hesitation, looking directly into his eyes. Her eyes were a deep, defiant green. Before Edward could respond, Maria hurried into the dining room, a hint of nervousness in her posture. "Mr. Vance, I see you've met Camila Rodriguez. I hired her a few months ago to help around the house. She's excellent at her job," Maria explained, her tone suggesting she was seeking his approval. Edward observed Camila with a cold gaze. "I don't recall authorizing any new hires, Maria." "With all due respect, sir," Camila interjected, her voice calm but firm, a ripple of quiet defiance in her tone. "You gave Maria full authority over the house staff before you left." A tense silence fell over the room. No one, absolutely no one, dared to contradict Edward. He felt a surge of irritation, mixed with something else he couldn't quite identify, a flicker of surprise, perhaps, at her audacity. "If you'll excuse me," Camila said, her posture unwavering, "I'll get your coffee." Still black, no sugar. Edward simply nodded, surprised she knew such a specific detail. He watched her leave the dining room, noting that her posture showed no hint of intimidation. "Maria," he said when Camilla was out of earshot, "explain why we need additional staff. The house is large, sir. And ever since—" Maria hesitated, her voice softening. "Ever since Mrs. Eleanor left us, we needed extra help. Camilla has been a blessing. The gardens have never looked better and—" "The gardens were Eleanor's domain," Edward cut in sharply, his voice raw with a pain he couldn't hide. "I know, sir, but the roses were dying," Maria replied, her voice gentle. "Camilla saved them. She has a special touch." Edward remembered the figure he'd seen the night before in the garden. So it was her. Camilla returned with his coffee, serving it with a natural grace that seemed oddly out of place for household staff. For a moment, their gazes met, and Edward felt something he hadn't experienced in years. A profound discomfort. "Anything else you need, Mr. Vance?" she asked with a slight, knowing smile. "No," he replied curtly, grabbing the newspaper to create a physical barrier between them. But even from behind the paper, he could feel her presence. It was as if she had brought something new into the house, something that disturbed the careful, sterile order he had so meticulously constructed around his grief. And that, more than her defiant attitude, was what truly unsettled him. What if the very sanctuary you built against grief held a hidden message from the past, urging you to confront your deepest fears and embrace an unforeseen future? That night, insomnia hit Edward harder than usual. After hours of restless tossing and turning, he finally gave up and rose from bed, heading to his study. The full moon illuminated the room through the large windows, casting dancing shadows across the mahogany bookshelves. Without thinking, his fingers brushed against the drawer where he kept Eleanor's personal belongings. He never opened it. It was a self-imposed rule, a rigid boundary he'd built around his grief. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the faint scent of roses wafting in from the garden, or perhaps the persistent unease he'd felt since returning home. With trembling hands, he unlocked the drawer and pulled out Eleanor's journal. It was a simple notebook with a worn blue cover. He'd found it among her things after the funeral, but he'd never had the courage to read it. He poured himself a whiskey, the amber liquid glinting in the moonlight, and sat in his leather armchair. As he opened the journal, a faded photograph fluttered to the floor. It was from their wedding day. Eleanor smiled radiantly, her eyes full of joy, while he looked at her with adoration. Felt like another lifetime. The first few pages were mundane, filled with garden plans, shopping lists, and cheerful thoughts about their life together. But then he turned to an entry that stole his breath. It was dated just weeks before her death. "My dearest Edward." The entry began, written in her elegant, familiar script. "I know you'll find this journal someday. I know you better than anyone, and I know it will take you a long time to open it. But when you do, I need you to understand something. If one day someone makes your heart beat again, don't resist it. Love doesn't die, it transforms." Edward slammed the journal shut. His hand shook as he brought the glass to his lips, finishing the whiskey in one gulp, the burn in his throat mirroring the ache in his chest. Why had she written that? Did she know? No, it was impossible. Eleanor had always been like that, a romantic and optimist, always believing in second chances. He stood up and walked to the window. From there, he could see the garden, where Eleanor's roses bloomed more vibrantly than ever. And for a moment, he remembered the gentle way Camilla tended to them, with the same meticulous care Eleanor used to show. But he couldn't leave it there. He reopened the journal, his eyes scanning pages filled with Eleanor's graceful calligraphy. "If one day someone makes your heart beat again, don't resist it." Edward ran a hand over his face. His thoughts were a chaotic mess. Was that truly what Eleanor wanted? For him to move on? He looked out the window again, towards the garden where Camilla had brought the roses back to life. He couldn't keep running, but he also couldn't just throw himself into something new without first confronting his own profound fear. He closed the journal more calmly this time. He needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to him. Love was a luxury he could no longer afford, a risk he wasn't willing to take. He put the journal back in the drawer and locked it. But Eleanor's words kept echoing in his mind. Love doesn't die, it transforms. That night, for the first time in years, Edward dreamed. And in his dreams, the roses bloomed, while a soft laugh, not Eleanor's, called to him from the garden. What if breaking a long-standing routine, and facing a truth you've tried to bury, opens the door to an unexpected warmth that begins to thaw a frozen heart? Mr. Vance, would you like to join us tonight? Maria asked cautiously, her voice soft. It was Friday, and like every month, the staff shared an informal dinner in the kitchen. Edward looked up from his documents, ready to decline the invitation as he always did, to retreat into his familiar solitude. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the inviting aroma of spices drifting in from the kitchen, or maybe the loneliness of his study simply felt heavier than usual tonight. All right, he responded, surprising both Maria and himself. The kitchen transformed at night. The harsh overhead lights were softened, casting a warm glow, and the normally bustling utilitarian space became a cozy, inviting haven. Edward entered and found the entire staff gathered around the large central table. Old man George the gardener, the two chauffeurs, the housekeepers, Maria and Camilla. She was serving a stew that smelled absolutely delicious. It's my grandmother's recipe, she explained, noticing his curious glance. Chicken in mole poblano. Edward took the only available seat, coincidentally directly across from her. The staff seemed visibly tense with his presence, hushed and rigid, but Camilla acted with a startling naturalness, as if it were perfectly normal for the owner of the house to be dining in the kitchen with his employees. You know, Mr. Vance? Camilla said, as she poured the wine, her voice a gentle challenge. The roses in the garden told me you weren't always so serious. An uncomfortable silence immediately fell over the table. No one, absolutely no one, ever dared to mention the past or his personality in front of Edward. The roses talk to you? He responded, a hint of sarcasm in his voice, but a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. Yes, she continued, completely unfazed by his tone. They said you used to smile, and that you have a crescent-shaped mole that only shows when you truly smile. Edward almost choked on his wine. It was true. Eleanor used to tease him about that mole, a tiny mark that only appeared when he genuinely, uninhibitedly smiled. The roses seem very gossipy, he commented, a rare, small smile actually gracing his lips. To everyone's surprise, including his own, the tension at the table instantly dissipated. Old man George began to recount lively stories from his years in the house. The chauffeurs shared amusing anecdotes from their travels, and for the first time in a very long time, Edward found himself genuinely enjoying a meal, actually listening to the conversations around him. He found himself watching Camilla as she laughed at a story. She wasn't conventionally beautiful by society's rigid standards, but there was something profoundly magnetic about her. The way her deep green eyes sparkled when she smiled, how she gestured expressively when she spoke, the effortless naturalness with which she moved in a space he had made so rigid and formal. More wine, Mr. Vance? She offered, interrupting his thoughts. Edward, he said, without thinking, the name slipping out, raw and unfamiliar. When we're not working, you can call me Edward. The genuine, unreserved smile Camilla gave him in response made something deep inside him stir, a tiny spark of warmth. And, for the first time in 2 years, the crushing weight in his chest felt, miraculously, a little lighter. What happens when an undeniable presence, like a blooming rose, slowly but surely melts the icy fortress around a heart determined to stay cold? Edward couldn't focus on the documents in front of him. It was the third time he'd read the same paragraph without comprehending a single word. Ever since that informal dinner last week, something subtle had shifted within him. He found his thoughts drifting unexpectedly to details that had once gone completely unnoticed, like the faint sound of Camilla's laughter drifting from the garden each morning, or the way the late afternoon sun made her hair gleam as she passed through the hallway. These were tiny moments, insignificant to anyone else, yet they stubbornly, persistently, invaded his mind without permission. "Is the coffee all right, sir?" she asked, entering his study with a steaming mug. "Yes, thank you," he replied curtly, trying desperately to maintain his rigid composure, to keep her at arm's length. But when she leaned over to place the mug on his desk, the delicate scent of jasmine from her hair enveloped him like a wave. It was so different from the expensive perfumes worn by the women in his social circle. Simple, natural, and utterly, disturbingly captivating. "The red roses are blooming," Camila commented before leaving, her voice soft, almost an invitation. "You should come see them sometime." Edward stared at the closed door, a sudden jolt going through him. The red roses were Eleanor's favorites. He had ordered them all removed after her death, unable to bear the sight of them, a painful reminder of his loss. But Camila, unknowingly, had brought them back to life. He rose and walked to the window. From there, he could see her working in the garden, her sleeves rolled up, a few strands of hair escaping her loose ponytail. She didn't possess the studied elegance of society women, but she moved with a natural grace that mesmerized him. "What are you doing, Edward?" he chastised himself, turning away from the window abruptly. But it was too late. He had already, unwillingly, memorized the way she bit her lip when she concentrated, the gentle way her hands caressed the flower petals, the satisfied smile that spread across her face when she finished a task. He tried to take refuge in his work, as he always did, to bury himself in the familiar comfort of numbers and deadlines. But the figures on his screen blurred, replaced by images of challenging green eyes. Important board meetings became indistinct, overshadowed by the memory of a sincere laugh. "Sir, do you need anything else?" Maria's voice broke through his thoughts. "No, you may leave," he replied, noticing it was already dark outside. When everyone else had gone to bed, Edward remained in his study, locked in a silent battle against feelings he believed had died with Eleanor. The whiskey in his glass did little to clarify his thoughts. It only served to make the memories of Camilla's smile, her voice, her undeniable presence, more vivid, more insistent, filling every corner of the vast, empty room. "This has to stop," he murmured to himself, his voice raw. But deep down he knew it was already too late. Something that had been dormant for too long was awakening, and he had no idea how to put it back to sleep. What happens when a lifetime of guarded emotions finally shatters under the weight of an unexpected storm, revealing a desperate longing you never dared to acknowledge? The storm descended upon Chicago without warning. Lightning illuminated the sky in blinding, fleeting flashes, and the wind whipped furiously through the garden trees. Edward watched from his study, a silent observer of the chaos, when the lights in the mansion flickered ominously. "Damn it!" he heard a frustrated voice from the garden. He quickly went to the window and saw her, Camila, drenched, battling with the fuse box near the greenhouse. Without a second thought, he grabbed an umbrella and rushed outside. "What are you doing out here?" he shouted, trying to make himself heard over the howling wind and pounding rain. "The greenhouse," she yelled back, pointing to the heating system. "If it goes out, the orchids won't survive the night." Edward approached, holding the umbrella over both of them. They were so close he could see the raindrops clinging to her eyelashes, shimmering in the sporadic flashes of lightning. "Let me see," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, to ignore the sudden, intense proximity. Their hands brushed as she passed him the flashlight, and the electric current he felt had absolutely nothing to do with the storm raging around them. They worked together, shoulder to shoulder, the rain soaking them, the world outside fading away. "There," he finally said, closing the fuse box. "It should work now." They turned at the same time, finding themselves face to face under the small shelter of the umbrella. Time seemed to stop, suspended in the chaos. Camilla's wet hair clung to her cheeks, her clothes plastered to her body. But her eyes, those deep green eyes, blazed with an intensity that stole his breath. "Thank you," she whispered, so close he could feel her breath on his lips. Edward knew he should pull away. It was the right thing to do, the safe thing to do, but his body refused to respond. Instead, he found his hand rising to her cheek, gently wiping away a single raindrop with his thumb. Camila didn't move, didn't recoil. She simply looked at him with a complex mixture of defiance and a raw vulnerability that utterly shattered his last defenses. Without thinking, without allowing himself a single moment of doubt, he kissed her. It was a desperate, hungry kiss, as if both of them had been holding their breath for months, for years. The umbrella fell, forgotten, as his hands tangled in her wet hair, and she clung to his shirt, pulling him closer. The rain drenched them, but it didn't matter. Thunder rumbled overhead, but they barely noticed. In that moment, only they existed. The taste of rain on their lips, the burning warmth of their bodies against the cold night, the undeniable pull between them. When they finally broke apart, gasping for breath, reality slowly began to seep back in. Edward saw the fear mirrored in Camila's eyes, the very same fear that churned within him. She began, but he silenced her with another kiss, softer this time, more deliberate, a desperate plea for time to stand still. "Don't say anything," he murmured against her lips. "Please, don't say anything." And under the pouring rain, in the middle of the garden she had brought back to life, they allowed themselves to forget everything else. What happens when years of unspoken desire finally ignite, consuming two souls in a night of passion, and shattering the walls built around a heart long frozen by grief? The distance between the stormy garden and Edward's bedroom became a blur of hurried footsteps, dripping water, and stolen kisses. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the doorknob, not from the cold of their soaked clothes, but from the raw, contained desire that had simmered for so long. Camila entered after him, quietly closing the door behind her. For a moment, they stood looking at each other in the dim light, as if both needed to assure themselves this was real, not just a dream. The only light in the vast room came from the sporadic flashes of lightning that still illuminated the night sky through the windows. "We can stop," Edward whispered, his voice a little hoarse, giving her one last chance to escape, to retreat from the precipice they stood on. For her only answer, Camila stepped closer, her fingers gracefully moving to the buttons of his soaked shirt, slowly unfastening them. Her fingertips brushed his skin with each movement, sending shivers racing through his entire body. Edward closed his eyes, losing himself in the sensation, the exquisite torture of her touch. "Look at me," she requested softly. When he opened his eyes, he found her gazing at him with an intensity that disarmed him completely. There was no fear in her eyes, no lingering doubt, only raw, unbridled desire and something far deeper that neither of them dared to name. Edward pulled her fiercely into his arms, kissing her with a desperate passion he believed he'd long forgotten. His hands roamed over her body, memorizing every curve, every trembling response. Their wet clothes fell to the floor, forgotten and discarded, as they moved instinctively towards the bed. Camila's skin was soft beneath his fingers, warm despite the lingering chill of the rain. Edward kissed her neck, her shoulders, reveling in the small, breathless sounds that escaped her lips. Every moan, every sigh was like music to his ears, a symphony of newfound sensation. "Edward," she whispered, arching against him, his name on her lips sounding different, like a fervent prayer, like a fragile promise. He kissed her deeply, wanting to engrave this moment in his memory forever. They moved together as if they had been waiting for this exact moment their entire lives. Every caress, every kiss, every intimate touch of their bodies was perfect, inevitable, a force of nature. The storm outside echoed the consuming passion that enveloped them. For the first time in years, Edward allowed himself to feel completely, utterly. There was no pain, no crushing guilt, only the vibrant present, only Camila in his arms, responding to his every touch with equal fervor, equal abandon. When they finally came together, it was as if something profound within him was irrevocably released. The last, impenetrable barrier around his heart crumbled, and he surrendered himself completely to the moment, to her, to everything he had been denying for so long. Afterward, As they lay entangled in the soft sheets, the rain outside began to subside, a gentle patter replacing the furious drumming. Camilla rested peacefully on his chest, her breathing soft and regular. Edward absently caressed her back. Feeling a deep sense of peace he believed he'd lost forever. For that one night, he allowed himself to dream of a different future. For that one night, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, love wasn't so far out of his reach after all. What happens when the intoxicating haze of passion lifts with the dawn, revealing a terrifying truth that forces a heart, long guarded by grief, to betray the very person who dared to awaken it? The first rays of dawn filtered through the window, painting the room in soft, ethereal hues. Edward stirred, disoriented for a moment. The warmth of another body beside him, the faint scent of jasmine clinging to the sheets, and then the memories of the night before crashed over him like an avalanche. Camilla slept peacefully beside him, her hair fanned across the pillow, one hand resting softly on his chest. She looked so tranquil, so breathtakingly beautiful, that for an instant, Edward felt his heart simply stop, caught in the sheer, overwhelming perfection of the moment. And it was that very instant that unleashed a wave of chilling panic. Images, sharp and cruel, began to flash in his mind. Eleanor in that same bed, smiling, telling him she loved him. Eleanor in the hospital, pale, promising him everything would be all right. Eleanor's empty side of the bed, a constant, gaping void. He sat up abruptly, a sudden, violent movement that startled Camilla awake. "Edward?" she murmured, still groggy with sleep. "This was a mistake," he said, his voice cold, flat, utterly devoid of warmth. "It shouldn't have happened." He watched, with a sickening lurch, as pain, raw and searing, flashed across Camilla's face, shadowing her vibrant eyes. She sat up in bed, clutching the sheet to her chest, her body suddenly rigid. "A mistake?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper, laced with disbelief. "I'm your boss," he continued, throwing on his bathrobe without looking at her. His back to her, unable to face the raw accusation in her gaze. This was inappropriate, unprofessional. Unprofessional. Camilla's voice trembled, but a spark of indignation, fierce and undeniable, flickered in her eyes. "Is that all you have to say? How can you act like last night meant nothing?" "Because it meant nothing," he lied, each word a cruel knife twisting in his own chest, tearing at his soul. The silence that followed was deafening, suffocating, punctuated only by the ragged sound of his own breathing. When he finally dared to turn, Camilla was already dressed, standing rigidly by the door. Her green eyes, usually so bright and full of life, were now dark with pain and a furious, wounded pride. "I understand," she said, her voice eerily calm, a stark contrast to the storm raging in her gaze. "Don't worry, Mr. Vance. I won't forget my place again." The formality in her voice was worse than any scream, a chilling dismissal that cut him to the core. The door closed softly behind her, but the sound resonated in the vast room like a gunshot, leaving Edward utterly alone. The initial panic slowly transformed into a dull, crushing ache in his chest. He had done the right thing, he told himself, desperately clinging to the cold, rational thought. It was better this way, better to end this before it was too late, before he risked everything again. But as he looked at the disheveled bed, the sheets that still retained the faint, lingering scent of her jasmine, a voice deep inside him whispered that it was already too late. What happens when the silence you craved becomes a torment, and the absence of one person makes the entire world feel empty, leaving you to confront the devastating consequences of your fear? The next 2 days in the Vance mansion were an agonizing exercise in avoidance. Edward locked himself in his study from early morning, emerging only when he was absolutely certain Camilla wouldn't be nearby. He ate at irregular hours and had given Maria specific instructions that only she was to bring him coffee. But it was impossible not to feel her presence. The delicate scent of the flowers she cut each morning still drifted to his window. The distant sound of her voice, now always serious and professional, subtly drifted through the hallways. She was like a ghost haunting him, a constant, painful reminder of everything he was desperately trying to forget. "Mr. Vance?" Maria entered with his afternoon coffee, her voice tinged with concern. "Is everything all right?" "Of course," he replied curtly, not looking up from his documents. "It's just that Camila asked to change her schedule." Maria continued, her voice softer. "She only works when you're not around now." Edward felt a sharp pang in his chest, but he kept his face impassive. "That's her decision." Maria looked at him with that unique blend of maternal concern and gentle reproach that only she dared to allow herself. "You're hurting her, you know? And it seems to me you're hurting yourself too." "I don't know what you're talking about," he snapped, his voice tense. "Do you need anything else?" The old woman shook her head slowly and left, leaving him alone with his spiraling thoughts. Edward rose and walked to the window. From there, he could see the garden, where the roses Camila had so lovingly rescued still bloomed vibrantly, a constant, beautiful reminder of what he was losing. One afternoon, leaving a meeting, he found her in the hallway. It was inevitable, a collision course he couldn't avoid. She was carrying a vase of fresh flowers, and he was too engrossed in his phone. They almost bumped into each other. "Excuse me, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice so formal it was like a physical ache. She didn't look him in the eye. Edward wanted to say something. He wanted to explain that it wasn't her fault, that he was broken, that he didn't know how to love without destroying. But the words, choked by a lifetime of suppressed emotion, simply caught in his throat. "Excuse me," she murmured, brushing past him, her jasmine perfume lingering in the air like a cruel reminder of that night. Edward stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, feeling that every step she took moved her further away from something he hadn't even allowed himself to desire. That night, sitting in his study with a glass of whiskey in hand, Edward realized the silence was worse than any rejection. It was as if he had built an impenetrable wall between them, and every passing day, every avoided glance, every unspoken word, made that wall taller, thicker, more terrifyingly permanent. But this was better, he repeated to himself, desperately. The silence was safe. The silence couldn't break his heart. The silence couldn't abandon him. What he refused to admit was that the silence was already, slowly, inexorably, killing him. What happens when a broken heart chooses to flee from pain, leaving behind a profound absence that finally shatters a man's carefully constructed world of denial? Camila entered Maria's office early that morning, a plain white envelope clutched in her hand and a fierce determination in her eyes that barely concealed her profound pain. "I'm resigning," she said simply, placing the envelope on the desk. Maria, who was organizing the week schedules, looked up, startled. "What? But, child." "I've made my decision," Camila interrupted, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "I can't stay here anymore." "Is it about Mr. Vance?" Maria asked softly, her gaze knowing. Camila bit her lip, fighting back the hot tears that threatened to spill. "I can't work like this, Maria. I can't pretend he doesn't exist, that nothing happened. I can't keep seeing him act like I'm invisible." A bitter laugh escaped her. "He's suffering too, I know, but he has a cruel way of showing it." Then more calmly, she added, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to shout." Maria rose and pulled her into a warm embrace. Camila finally let the tears fall, soaking the housekeeper's shoulder. "What am I going to do?" she whispered, her voice choked with sobs. "My niece owns a flower shop in Brooklyn," Maria said, gently stroking Camila's hair. "I'll call her. With your experience in the garden, I'm sure." Camila nodded, grateful for the lifeline. "I'll leave today. I don't want to. I can't say goodbye to him." "Are you sure? Maybe if you talk to him." "Why? So he can look at me with that coldness again? So he can remind me I'm just an employee who made the mistake of—" Her voice broke, unable to voice the unspoken truth. She had made the mistake of falling in love with him. "At least let me help you with your things," Maria offered. Camila shook her head. "I already packed everything last night. I just came to hand in my resignation and say goodbye to you." She pulled away from the embrace, wiping her tears. "Thank you for everything, Maria. For giving me a chance. For being like a mother to me. Oh, my child." Maria was crying now too. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself." "I will," Camila assured her, trying to smile through her tears. She walked out of the office without looking back. As she walked through the garden one last time, her fingers brushed the petals of the roses she had tended with so much love. Each flower held a memory. The peaceful mornings, the quiet conversations with the other staff, the night of the storm. As she reached the gate, she paused for a moment. From there, she could see the window of Edward's study. For a second, she thought she saw a silhouette watching her, but perhaps it was just her imagination. "Goodbye," she whispered to the wind, and closed the gate behind her for the very last time. Edward watched from his study window, a cold, forgotten coffee on his desk. Something was profoundly different that morning. The garden seemed quieter, emptier. He hadn't heard Camila's laughter, nor the soft humming that usually accompanied her work among the flowers. Maria buzzed him on the intercom. "Where is Miss Rodriguez?" There was a long, heavy silence before Maria entered his study. Her serious expression sent a chill down Edward's spine. "She left," he said simply, his voice flat, seeing the white envelope on his desk. "She resigned this morning." Edward felt as if he'd been punched in the stomach. He picked up the envelope with trembling hands, reading the brief, formal, cold, and utterly professional resignation letter, exactly as he had wanted things to be. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he demanded, his voice tense. "Why?" Maria responded, with an uncharacteristic hardness in her voice, looking him dead in the eye. "So you could treat her with the same coldness you've shown these past few days? So you could hurt her more?" "No." "Yes, you did." Maria interrupted him again, her voice unwavering. "You destroyed her, sir. And from what I see, you're destroying yourself too." Edward rose abruptly, walking to the window, his back to her. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know more than you think," Maria said softly, her voice filled with a quiet, undeniable pain. "Mrs. Eleanor. Don't you dare mention her." Edward roared, turning to her in a furious outburst. "Don't you dare." "Why not? Why does it hurt?" Maria pressed, her voice breaking slightly but still firm. "Why is it easier to hide behind her memory than to admit you're terrified of loving again?" Maria's words struck him like physical blows, each one a searing indictment. He sank into his chair, suddenly utterly exhausted, the fight draining from him. "Where is she?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper, broken and raw. "She didn't tell me. And even if I knew, I'm not sure you deserve to know." Maria left, leaving him alone with his spiraling thoughts and the crushing weight of his decisions. Edward stared at the envelope in his hands, searching for a clue, any sign of the Camila he had known in those formal, empty words. He rose and walked to the garden. The roses she had cared for with so much love seemed to look at him with reproach. The very air felt heavier without her presence. He had gotten what he wanted, to keep his heart safe, to protect himself from pain. But as he looked at the empty garden, Edward realized that Camila's absence hurt more than any risk he had ever feared taking. "What have I done?" he whispered to the wind, but only silence answered him. What happens when the past you ran from catches up, not with a whisper, but with a life-altering truth that forces you to confront your deepest regrets and fight for a future you never imagined? Edward vaguely remembered Mariana insisting that Camila eat more during staff dinners, but he'd never paid it much mind. He'd simply been too absorbed in his own carefully constructed isolation. "I can't stomach this," Camila had once said, pushing her coffee aside with a look of disgust. "Since when don't you like coffee?" Mariana had asked with a curious smile. "For a few weeks now," Camila admitted, subconsciously touching her stomach. Edward hadn't said anything. At the time, the conversation held no meaning for him. Now, as Mariana entered his study, her face tense, and simply spoke Camila's name, Edward understood everything. "My niece saw her yesterday," Mariana began, her voice strained. At the clinic where she works. Is she sick? Edward asked, a cold knot forming in his throat, a sudden, inexplicable dread seizing him. Not exactly. Mariana took a deep breath. She's pregnant, almost 4 months along. The world seemed to stop, the air leaving Edward's lungs in a silent whoosh. What? He managed to articulate, his voice a raw whisper. And before you ask if it's yours, Mariana continued, her voice laced with bitterness. She hasn't been with anyone else. Edward stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward with a crash that echoed in the sudden, heavy silence. Why didn't she tell me? When you treated her like she was invisible, Mariana said, her voice sharp, cutting through him like a knife. When you made her feel like she was a mistake. Her words hit him like daggers, each one a searing indictment. He stumbled towards the window, desperately trying to process the earth-shattering information. A child. He was going to have a child. Where is she? He asked, his voice trembling, raw with a newfound desperation. She's working at a flower shop in Brooklyn, Mariana replied after a moment of hesitation. She lives in a small apartment nearby. Edward ran his hands through his hair, a desperate, frantic gesture. Why are you telling me this now? Because she deserves more than this. Her child deserves more than this. Mariana looked at him directly, her gaze unwavering. And because you, Mr. Vance, need to wake up once and for all. A heavy silence fell between them. Edward felt his world simultaneously crumble and reconstruct itself. I've been an idiot, he murmured, his voice thick with self-loathing. Yes, you have. Mariana agreed, her voice softened yet firm. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Edward looked at the garden through the window. The roses Camila had so lovingly cared for were still blooming, a constant, vibrant reminder of her enduring presence. I need to find her, he said finally, his voice clear and resolute, a determination he hadn't felt in years. To do what? Mariana asked, a skeptical edge in her voice. To hurt her again? No, Edward responded, and for the first time in months, his voice sounded utterly, undeniably sincere. To fix everything I've broken. To make things right. What happens when a man, desperate to atone for his past, confronts the woman he wronged, only to face the raw pain of his own making and the daunting challenge of earning back a broken trust? The small flower shop in Brooklyn was exactly the kind of place Camila would love. Flowers of every imaginable color adorned the entrance, and their sweet, delicate fragrance drifted lazily through the air. Edward sat in his car for several minutes, the powerful engine idling quietly, trying to gather the immense courage it would take to simply walk through that door. Finally, he took a deep, shaky breath and stepped out of the vehicle. Through the shop's glass facade, he could see her. She was meticulously arranging a bouquet of lilies, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Her pregnancy was now distinctly visible beneath her work apron, a gentle curve that spoke of new life. The soft chime of the bell above the door as he entered made her look up. Her eyes widened in shock, and the lily she was holding slipped from her trembling fingers, falling silently to the polished floor. What are you doing here? She asked, her voice a brittle whisper, laced with disbelief and a tremor of fear. Camila, Edward took a hesitant step towards her, but stopped as he saw her instinctively recoil, her hand flying to her belly, as if protecting it. I know. About the baby. She looked at him, and there was a raw, aching pain in her eyes, in her voice. Mariana told you? You needed to know. Why? She pressed, her voice sharp with unspoken hurt. To offer me money? To keep it a secret? No, he responded quickly, desperately. It's not that I, Miss Camila, a customer interrupted, walking into the shop, oblivious to the simmering tension. Is my bouquet ready? Yes, of course, Camila responded immediately, her voice instantly adopting a professional, distant tone. Just a moment, please. Edward watched her as she attended to the customer, noting how her hands, despite her outward calm, trembled slightly as she wrapped the flowers. When the woman left, The silence descended once more, heavy and suffocating. "I don't want your money," Camila said finally, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I don't want anything from you." "I know I don't deserve for you to listen to me," Edward said, his voice trembling, raw with self-loathing. "But I haven't stopped thinking about you, about what I did, about everything I ruined." Camila crossed her arms, her posture rigid, defensive. "And how long did it take you to realize that? A day? 2? Edward lowered his gaze, shame washing over him. "Too long. Far too long. But it also took me too long to realize that I don't know how to live without you." "Well, I do," she retorted coldly, her voice sharp, unforgiving. A long, agonizing silence fell between them. Edward clenched his fists, desperate. "I don't blame you, Camila. But I can't leave without trying to prove to you that I'm not the man who hurt you." For a moment, he saw something flicker in her eyes. A fleeting hint of vulnerability. But it quickly hardened again, her defenses snapping back into place. "It's too late," she said softly, her voice filled with an aching sadness. I can't trust you, not after how you treated me. Give me a chance," he pleaded, his voice raw. "Please, for our child." "Our child?" she repeated, a bitter, ironic laugh escaping her lips. 3 months ago, you couldn't even look me in the eye, and now you want to be a father?" Edward took a desperate step towards her. "I want to try, please. I'm so sorry." Her voice finally broke, a raw, painful sound. "But I need you to leave. Now." Edward felt his world crumble around him, but he nodded slowly, accepting her demand. Before leaving, he turned one last time, his gaze fixed on her. "I'll be back," he promised, his voice firm, unwavering. "I won't give up so easily this time." The doorbell chimed again as he walked out, leaving Camila alone with her tears and a fallen lily on the floor. What happens when a man, desperate to atone, embarks on a relentless campaign to heal the heart he shattered, proving that true love is built not on grand gestures, but on unwavering consistency? The very next morning, a colossal arrangement of vibrant red roses arrived at the flower shop. Camila read the accompanying card with trembling hands. "For every day I ignored you." The following day, pristine white lilies arrived. "For every tear I made you shed." And so, every single day, a new, breathtaking arrangement, each one carrying a different, heartfelt message. But Edward didn't stop at flowers. He began to appear at her prenatal appointments, sitting silently in the waiting room, a formidable, unexpected presence. The first time, Camila almost fainted when she saw him there, his tall frame looking oddly out of place among the expectant mothers. "What are you doing here?" she whispered when she finally emerged from the consultation room. "I want to be part of this," he responded simply, his voice low and sincere. "Can I see the ultrasound?" With hesitant doubt, she passed him the small black and white image. Edward's eyes welled up as he gazed at the tiny, blurry figure on the screen. "It's a girl," Camila murmured, almost to herself, her voice a soft, involuntary whisper. Edward looked up, a genuine, radiant smile illuminating his face. A girl. Days later, small, thoughtfully chosen packages began to appear at her apartment. Tiny baby clothes, a bassinet, a collection of soft toys. Camila wanted to refuse them, to send them back, but each gift came with a personal, heartfelt note, raw with genuine emotion, making it increasingly difficult for her to maintain her defenses. "You can't buy me," she told him one day, finding him waiting patiently outside the flower shop after her shift. "I'm not trying to buy you," he responded, his voice earnest. "I'm trying to show you that I'm here, that I want to be a part of your lives, truly. And what if one day you decide it was a mistake?" she challenged, her voice laced with lingering pain. "What if you retreat again? Close yourself off?" Edward took a step closer, but respected the invisible boundary she still held between them. "I've spent the last 3 months living with the worst mistake of my life. I won't make the same mistake twice. I promise you." One day, Camila had a scare. Intense pains sent her to the emergency room in the middle of the night. When she arrived at the hospital, Edward was already there, pale with raw worry, a stark contrast to his usual composure. "How did you know?" she asked, surprised, touched despite herself. "I asked your neighbor to let me know if anything happened," he admitted, his voice strained with relief at seeing her. Can I stay with you?" She nodded, too frightened and vulnerable to refuse his comforting presence. Edward held her hand through the entire examination, and when the doctor confirmed that everything was fine, they both wept tears of overwhelming relief. "Thank you for being here," she whispered as he drove her home. "Always," he responded, his voice thick with emotion. "If you let me, I'll always be here." That night, as he helped her settle onto her small sofa, Camila saw something profoundly different in his eyes. It wasn't the cold Edward who had rejected her, nor the powerful executive who tried to control everything. It was simply a scared man, utterly determined to make things right this time, to truly earn his place. Would you like to stay for dinner?" she asked softly, a fragile hope in her voice. Edward's smile lit up the entire small apartment. "I'd love to," he replied, his voice gentle. It was a small step, a single, tentative beginning. What happens when a new opportunity forces you to confront the deepest desires of your heart, and a man battles his own fears to prove he's finally worthy of a second chance at love? "We have an opening at our Boston branch," Sandra, the owner of the flower shop chain, said, handing a white envelope to Camila. "The manager position is yours if you want it." Camila looked at the envelope, a mix of excitement and anxiety swirling within her. It was an incredible opportunity. A better salary, a position of greater responsibility, the possibility of a completely new start, far away. "I have a week to decide, right?" she asked, absently caressing her 6-month pregnant belly. "Yes, but with your experience and talent, I'd be foolish not to push you a little," Sandra smiled. "Think about it carefully." That night, sitting in her small apartment, Camila reread the offer over and over. Edward would arrive any moment for their now regular Tuesday dinner, and she had no idea how to break the news to him. The sound of the doorbell pulling her from her thoughts. Edward entered with bags of Chinese takeout and a smile that immediately vanished as he saw her troubled expression. "Is everything all right?" he asked, setting the bags on the table. The baby's fine," she assured him. It's something else." She handed him the envelope and watched his face change as he read. She saw the exact moment he understood what it meant. Boston was hours away, a new life entirely. "It's a great opportunity," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, a mask over his emotions. "It is. Have you decided?" Camila rose, walking to the window. It would be a new beginning, a better job, a new city. "Far from here. Far from me," he completed, his voice a quiet, painful realization. "Edward." "No," he interrupted, stepping closer. "I understand. After everything that happened, you have every right to want to move away, to escape. It's not just about you," she said softly. "It's about me too. I need to know I can do this on my own, that I don't depend on anyone. You don't have to do it alone." His voice was almost a plea, raw with vulnerability. "I know I made mistakes, but these last few months have been beautiful," she admitted, her voice thick with emotion. "But what if you get scared again? What if you close yourself off again? Now it's not just my heart at stake." Edward took her hands in his, holding them gently, reverently. "What if I promise you that won't happen? Promises are easy to make," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Then I'm not asking you to trust my promises," he said, his voice unwavering. "I'm asking you to trust what you see, the man who has been with you at every doctor's appointment, who has learned the names of all your flowers, who has fallen a little more in love with you every single day." Camila felt the tears stream down her cheeks. "I'm scared." "Me too," he admitted, his eyes filled with a raw honesty. "But for the first time in my life, I'm more afraid of losing you than of loving you." The baby gave a kick, as if offering its opinion. Camila laughed through her tears. Looks like someone agrees with you, she said, guiding Edward's hand to her belly. Is that a yes? He asked, his eyes shining with desperate hope. Camila looked at her offer letter, then at Edward, and finally at her growing belly. The decision she had made that morning no longer seemed so firm. With one condition, she finally said. Anything. No more walls, no more coldness. If you're scared, you tell me. If you doubt, we talk it out. We're a team now. Edward smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up his entire face. I promise you, the walls are gone. And there, in the middle of her small apartment, with takeout containers and legal documents as their witnesses, Edward kissed Camila as if it were the first time, as if they had all the time in the world, as if he had finally found his home. Let's go home, she whispered against his lips. Home, he repeated, taking her suitcase with one hand and intertwining the other with hers. Together, what happens when love, forged in the fires of past pain and fear, blooms anew, transforming a house into a vibrant home and proving that true happiness is built on truth, courage, and endless possibilities. A year later, the garden of the Vance mansion was more alive than ever. The roses bloomed with renewed vigor, as if celebrating the new life that now filled the house. Among the rose bushes, a small wicker bassinet swayed gently under the shade of an ancient oak tree. Edward watched from the terrace as Camila tenderly rocked little Eleanor, named in honor of his first wife. The baby had Camila's vibrant green eyes and Edward's charming smile, a perfect combination of them both. What are you thinking about? Camila asked, approaching with the baby in her arms, her voice soft with contentment. How different everything is now, he responded, wrapping them both in a loving embrace. How love can transform everything. Maria watched them from the kitchen door with a satisfied, maternal smile. The mansion, which had once been cold and silent, was now filled with laughter and the vibrant sounds of life. Your mother was right, Edward said softly, remembering the words from Eleanor's journal. Love doesn't die, it transforms. Camila looked at him curiously. Eleanor said that? Yes, in her journal. Somehow she knew this would happen, that someone would come to awaken my heart again. Little Eleanor yawned in her mother's arms, her tiny fingers clutching the necklace Edward had given Camila at their wedding, 3 months after the baby was born. You know what's the most incredible thing? Edward continued, gently caressing his daughter's cheek. I used to believe love was limited, that you could only love once. But now I know that love multiplies, it grows, it expands, it finds new ways to manifest itself. Camila nestled against his chest, the baby between them. And you're not scared anymore? The only fear I have is not having enough time to love you both as much as you deserve, he responded, kissing her forehead. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. In the garden, the roses swayed gently in the breeze, silent witnesses to how love had transformed not only one heart, but an entire family. What happens when a lifetime of fear is overcome by the courage to love, leading to a vibrant future built on truth, family, and the profound realization that the greatest victories are found in the heart. 1 year later, the garden of the Vance mansion was more vibrant than ever. The roses bloomed with a renewed vigor, celebrating the new life that now filled the house. Amidst the rose bushes, a small wicker bassinet swayed gently under the shade of an ancient oak tree, a symbol of growth and peace. Edward watched from the terrace as Camila tenderly held their little Eleanor, named in honor of his first wife. The baby had Camila's deep green eyes and Edward's infectious smile, a perfect blend of them both, a living testament to their journey. What are you thinking about? Camila asked, approaching him with the baby in her arms, her voice soft with contentment. Just how different everything is now, he responded, wrapping them both in a loving embrace. How love can truly transform everything. Maria, the steadfast housekeeper, observed them from the kitchen door, a satisfied maternal smile gracing her lips. The mansion, once cold and silent, now vibrated with laughter, warmth, and the joyful sounds of a thriving family. Your mother was right, Edward said softly, remembering the profound words from Eleanor's journal. Love doesn't die. It transforms. Camilla looked at him, her eyes filled with curiosity. Eleanor said that? Yes, in her journal. Somehow she knew this would happen, that someone would come to awaken my heart again. Little Eleanor yawned in her mother's arms, her tiny fingers clutching the delicate necklace Edward had given Camilla at their wedding 3 months after the baby was born. You know what's the most incredible thing? Edward continued, gently caressing his daughter's soft cheek. I used to believe love was something limited, that you could only love once, that my heart had a finite capacity. But now I know that love multiplies, it grows, it expands, it finds new, boundless ways to manifest itself. Camilla snuggled against his chest, the baby nestled between them. And you're not scared anymore? The only fear I have is not having enough time to love you both as much as you truly deserve, he responded, his voice thick with emotion, kissing her forehead tenderly. The sun began to set, painting the sky in breathtaking hues of rose and gold. In the garden, the roses swayed gently in the evening breeze, silent witnesses to how love had transformed not only one guarded heart, but an entire family. Dear friends, if this heartwarming story of love, healing, and redemption between Edward and Camilla captivated you as much as it did me, don't hesitate to give us a like, share your comments, and share this video with your friends and family. This tale, about how love can melt even the coldest heart and profoundly transform our lives, deserves to be shared with all who believe in second chances and the enduring power of human connection. And if you want to keep enjoying more stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. I'd love to know where you are watching this beautiful story from. Where are you joining us from today? Let me know in the comments below, and tell me if you've also experienced a love story that transformed your life in unexpected ways.